And while I'm switching away from it, the reality is it's going to take me some time, and I'm probably still going to make lots of mistakes, including using the word koine instead of kine when I pronounce the word koine. There's a growing trend amongst those who teach New Testament Greek away from Erasmian pronunciation. In this video, I'm going to talk about why, and I'm talking about also why we're making the change away from Erasmian pronunciation as well. Now, I'm not a big pronunciation nerd. I don't really have strong views on pronunciation. So when I come to this subject, I'm not coming to it with a view that, my view is the only view and you should take the view that I've got or anything like that. If you've got Erasmian pronunciation, great. I started with Erasmian pronunciation. Largely, I'm still there. But also, if you have learnt reconstructed pronunciation or modern pronunciation, well, that's fine too. I have no trouble with that. And I don't hold that to be any particular benefit or negative in terms of who you are or what you do in terms of your knowledge of the language. I'm really focused on reading the New Testament in Greek, and I think for that purpose, while pronunciation is important, I don't think it is the biggest hill to die on, and I think there are other issues that are really important as well. Now, I also believe that there is no moral benefit in changing from one pronunciation system to another. As Christians, our righteousness is not based on what pronunciation system we use of Greek or any other thing that we do. It's based entirely on the work of Christ, and so I don't think that I'm going to be more righteous or more better for any reason than anybody who chooses any other different pronunciation method. But that said, I am making the switch away from Erasmian pronunciation, and I want to explain the reason why. First of all, we've known for a long time, probably decades really, that Erasmian pronunciation is not strictly the form of pronunciation that was used in the New Testament period. Now, there have been arguments on this on both sides for a little while, and the problem with that is that really those arguments have not been particularly well made, at least in my opinion. Not to say that there's no ground to them, not to say that we should ignore them, just trying to say that they haven't really been as strong and persuasive as they need to be. And another element of this too that I've found particularly difficult is that people get so hung up on one form of pronunciation that it actually becomes unhelpful for me wanting to be part of anybody who groups themselves with that form. So I just haven't wanted to get into that dogfight, so to speak. And Erasmian pronunciation does have some actual benefits. First of all, every letter does have its own sound, which means that it's easy to kind of allocate an individual sound to an individual letter. Not saying that's right or that's the way it should be, I'm just saying that's the way Erasmian pronunciation works. And the other thing about Erasmian pronunciation is it's very similar to English pronunciation, which means that for English readers or English learners, it's actually quite easy as a pronunciation method to pick up. And so these are some of the reasons I think it's tended to persist. And like I said, I started using this pronunciation method because it's what most seminaries and most academic institutions will use as well. And while I'm switching away from it, the reality is it's going to take me some time, and I'm probably still going to make lots of mistakes, including using the word koine instead of kine when I pronounce the word koine. But why change, and what should we change to, or what am I changing to? Well, what I think has actually been lacking in terms of pronunciation is actually good academic works focused on this subject. There's been works that have been written to say, well, we should be using modern pronunciation, or perhaps Erasmian pronunciation is better for X, Y, Z reasons, but even if those reasons are persuasive on the modern or reconstructed side, they don't normally do much other than advocate for why you should use this pronunciation method. Until recently, there's not been a resource that's been out there that's given you an explanation of what the pronunciation method was, and also guided you toward pronunciation using something along the lines of first century Greco-Roman pronunciation. And all of that changed last year with the publication of Benjamin Kantor's Short Guide to Pronunciation of the Greek New Testament. Now, if you look at this and you go, well, it's a short guide, that's not going to give you the detail you want. That's possibly true, but fortunately there's this larger tome, which is a far bigger and much more academic work that you can go grab a copy of if you do want the in-depth, detailed form of the argument and the explanations and so on. And so what Benjamin Kantor does in this short guide is he provides us with a comprehensive overview of how ancient Greek, Koine Greek, Kine Greek, the Greco-Roman Greek was pronounced based on spelling mistakes. Now he's got a chapter in here that explains really clearly how spelling mistakes help us to understand how ancient speakers of the language actually pronounce their pronunciation. So you get typos, for instance, or spelling mistakes. So if you confuse like the letter beta with perhaps maybe a upsilon in an epsilon construction, where you can see that the epsilon construction was actually pronounced a little bit like an epsilon beta pronunciation method. It's a little bit like in English where we confuse phonetic sounds in the same way. Like for instance, the word phone in English, spelling with an F sound. That would be the same kind of thing that we would see in these times. So Kantor does a great job of explaining, first of all, how we can tell what pronunciation was like during the 1st century. But then he goes on to actually explain every single letter, diphthong, breathing mark in the New Testament and combination of letters in many cases, so that you can actually see how these letters were pronounced, not just on their own, but also when they come in contact with one another and when they are in different words and sentences and so on. So this is a really comprehensive view. And not only that, but then he doesn't just give this to you for the Judeo-Palestinian kind of region. He actually goes beyond that into the entire Mediterranean basin to say, well, how are these letters and these sounds made in other areas? And then he traces that forward and backwards at times in time back into the classical times, or Attic Greek, or sometimes forward into Byzantine Greek as well, so that you can kind of see how he's come to the conclusions that he's come to. And this gives you then a comprehensive understanding of how pronunciation was, complete with its inconsistencies, because there are inconsistencies, as you would expect in the real world, in the Greco-Roman period around different periods of the Mediterranean. All of these are chronicled and explained very well in this short little book. Now, he doesn't call the form of pronunciation that he's advocating for reconstructed pronunciation. In fact, he would argue that it should just be called common pronunciation or everyday kine, perhaps, one of those kinds of phrases or words. So he's not arguing for any particular side, he's just giving you an explanation of this is what it's like. And it turns out that what he's actually arguing for here is very, very similar, by his own acknowledgement, to modern pronunciation. Now, when it comes to actually some of the key changes and differences that Kantor is arguing for, there are a few, there's quite a few really. And this is one of the things I think that does make it quite challenging to switch from Erasmian to modern pronunciation. For instance, the letter tau, T, right? It sounds like a T. He would argue that it should be pronounced a little bit like the T in the word stop. And that is to say, without a puff of air coming after it, as opposed to the letter T in the word tool, where we do tend to sound it out a little bit more. We have that puff of air that comes with it. And so that's actually not so bad, except that when that comes after a gamma, for instance, or a nasal sound, then it's going to be more like a D. So, for instance, panta, as opposed to panta. So those sorts of things do throw you just a little bit. Some letters are actually really challenging. Gamma, for instance, is a letter that often has, like in gamos, we have that harder J sound or G sound that we share with English. But then if that's followed, if that gamma is actually followed by a vowel, it can become a J, more like a J sound. So geneste or egeneto are the kinds of sounding that Kantor is arguing for. And again, I'm probably getting this a little bit wrong even here. In fact, even in English, pronunciation's really crazy. Like for instance, as a New Zealander, we hardly ever pronounce the R with a lot of emphasis, whereas in North America, the word R would come out. For instance, I have a friend whose name is Mark. And in America, we pronounce his name Mark, but here in New Zealand, he's just Mark. Now, Mark in New Zealand language sounds like Mac in English, in the American English. So pronunciation is just one of those things that varies all around the place, which is one of the things I really appreciate about Kantor's work, because it gives us that variation around the Mediterranean. So there are a whole bunch of letters and diphthongs and sounds that are a little different in ancient or Koine Greek to what they are in Erasmian. And that makes for some challenges as we switch from one pronunciation method to another. There's no easy way to do this cleanly, and I think we just end up, well, at least for me, I'm going to end up making a bit of a hash of both of them for a little while until I really get the hang of modern Greek. But the thing about Kantor that is nice is that here's a written guide with explanations that brings you along with the arguments as well. You've got the arguments for how things were pronounced, but then you've got the explanation of this is how you can bring that over. Complete within the appendix there are guided readings with the modern pronunciation, well, his reconstructed pronunciation or everyday pronunciation sit there so you can have a go at reading it out loud. So like I said, we are adopting modern pronunciation. I am going to try and adopt modern pronunciation for my pronunciation method for Greek. And inside our membership, we're not going to mandate that anybody has to change. Nobody does. Even our instructors can keep the pronunciation they would prefer to use. And as it turns out, we've got 3 of us. One of us has already switched to modern, and one of us is not sure if he's going to switch, and I am in the process of switching over as well. And so if you are a member or you've learnt beginning Greek with us or anywhere and you come into our membership, well, you're welcome. We will accept you and love you as an Erasmian pronouncer, and that's absolutely fine with us. We really don't mind. But for new members who come in wanting to learn Greek for the first time, we're going to be focusing on and prioritizing modern Greek pronunciation for the letters, since it's so close to what Kantor is arguing for in his book. Now, again, we know that not everybody in our membership wants to switch, and again, that's fine. We're not asking anybody to do that. If you like Erasmian pronunciation or you really just can't be bothered making the change, well, again, we're not going to penalize you for that. There's no inherent righteousness in having a particular method of pronunciation over another form. It really doesn't matter at the end of the day, other than for our own personal desire and edification as we're reading through the text of the New Testament. And honestly, we're reading the text, not speaking it to one another, so it really is between us and the Lord. And finally, one other thing we're going to do as part of our membership is that when we start a new beginning Greek course, we're actually going to put on a pronunciation workshop to help people learn how to pronounce New Testament Greek using modern pronunciation. So if you join us when we start a beginning Greek course, well, you'll be able to join one of those workshops and you'll be able to get the recording if you join in between. So that's why I'm switching from Erasmian pronunciation to modern pronunciation. It has nothing to do with all the arguments that are going on out there. It's really because now, finally, after all this time, there is a work that is persuasive in its argument and helpful in terms of its practice for helping us to go from another pronunciation method, Erasmian in this particular case, to something that is reasonably consistent with the way Koine Greek was pronounced during the Greco-Roman times. But I'm interested in hearing from you, as I always am. If you've started with Erasmian pronunciation and you've made the switch to modern or reconstructed pronunciation, then I'd love to know what you use to help you to do that. Leave a comment in the comment section below and let us know. And if you're not switching from Erasmian to any other pronunciation method, well, let us know why in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you there as well. And one thing about all of this, of course, is to remember that the main goal here is to read the New Testament in the original language, not to argue about pronunciation. Now, if you are interested in learning Greek, or maybe you want to get into our program and just go along, jump into our free Getting Started course at bma.to/get started, and that will get you underway as quickly as possible. Thanks so much for watching this video. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Until then, keep taking small, consistent steps toward mastery.